Do you ever feel like you're an imposter? As a student, you feel that you're not sure if you are allowed or you know what answers to give in class. As a teacher, you're not quite sure how to address a new course you need to teach. Or as a leader, you have a new assignment and you're not quite sure how to approach that. Well, that's the topic that we'll have today. And welcome to my podcast tonight. My name is Alain Faber, and I've been a teacher for more than 25 years and discussing different topics of interest about learning, about teaching, and leadership. Three topics that I enjoy, and I do these podcasts every week so that I can share some of my thoughts and share with you, and hopefully get input from what the discussion we are having right here. So thank you very much for people listening and for people putting comments or asking clarification questions on topics we're covering. Very good. Now, some of you will say, well, who am I to feel that I can answer that question about this idea of being an imposter or feeling that imposter syndrome? What do I know about it that I can share insight for you to do better? Well, I have to say that I'm a teacher for, as I mentioned earlier, 25 years, and I've gone through quite a few cycles of different classes. I've worked at different schools, I've worked with different colleagues, different curriculum, different towns, different students, different demographics. And what happens is that when you are dealing with a different environment, it's always tricky to figure out what you can actually bring forward. I have to share with you, before we go to the three segments later on about learner's perspective, the teacher's perspective, and the leader's perspective, I'd like to share with you a book that I've read a few years back and that opened my eyes quite a bit on that topic. And that book is a book, let's see if I can have the light here. It's from Robert Kiyosaki, and the book is called Fake. It goes like this: fake money, fake teachers, and fake assets. How lies are making the poor and the middle class poorer. When I read that book, when I saw that book, first of all, being publicized, I was very offended because I could not understand why someone like Robert Kiyosaki would say that the teachers can be fake. Now, I have to say this is a book that was published in 2019. At that time, I was starting my first YouTube channel, and I was not quite sure where I was going. And I realized that this idea of my fake teacher came into my mind. And that has changed actually how I have taught in my classroom in the last 5 years. And you're going to say, how would I change the way I teach after seeing or reading a section of this book about what are fake teachers? And I'll share with you. When I read this book, I was teaching a French class in a grade 12 class, and we were looking at, I was sharing with my grade 12 class what would be the topics for this semester. And I was sharing with you that we're looking, so it was a French class, how we would look at some literature, some would do some writing, some listening activities. And one of the writing activities I wanted them to do would be a blog before the end of the semester. And the first thing that my students asked was, so what qualifies me to actually ask them to write a blog? And that took me by surprise, because then I figured that if I'm asking my students to write a blog, have I in the past written a blog? That means that I would have the expertise to show them. And that raised quite a few thoughts in me, because I had never written a blog. So at that point became a new chapter in my teaching life, because in 2019, I realized that whatever I asked my students, I had to have it done before. So that means that if it's a French class, it's easy. French is my first language. I can help them to the maximum. If it is related to science, I'm a scientist, I'm a geologist. Therefore, in science class, I can help them tremendously. However, there are a few things that I did not have the experience with that I had to work with. And the first thing I did in that semester was to write a few blogs that I wrote for my classroom, that I wrote just for myself to see how it would be. The reason for that was that I wanted to show my students that I had done blogs, and then they realized that if I had done them, then it qualified me to ask them to write blogs, but also give relevant feedback. And that is part of my journey where I've started my YouTube channels, where I've done more and more videos about science, about learning, about teaching, about leadership, because these are topics that I have interests in. But also, I'm often asking my students to either do a video on a specific topic. So they can do a project where their visual is a board, could be something like an application on the web, but it can also be a video that they can share. Now, they know that if they present a video for me, I always ask them questions after the video, because I need to know if the research was theirs, and I need to know if the research was theirs as well. So I feel so much confident to ask my students to do videos because I've done hundreds of them. And therefore, I feel that it qualifies me to ask them for videos. I'm doing this podcast here because I started to, so it was in September. I was doing a course in communication technology. And one of my ideas was to start a podcast in that, was to ask my students to create a podcast for one of the unit. And I did the same for my science class. And I told myself that if I wanted to ask my students for podcasts type of end product, I needed to have done podcasts. So at least I have a better idea on what's involved. And that's the reason I started last August this podcast, which I had in mind that I would start, but never had a chance to actually sit down and do it. So I think this, so it shows my students that I'm willing to learn. It shows my students that before I teach, I've experimented before, therefore I have knowledge so that I can help them. And third, it brings more, credential as a leader in the classroom to share with them what I want them to do, but also for them to follow my lead. So from this point, we're going to look into three perspectives. So in my podcast, I always have three perspectives. The first one is about the learner's perspective. The second is about the teacher's perspective. And my third section is about the teacher's perspective. And with respect to the learner's perspective and students and learners feeling like they are imposters, I want to share that the best way to not feel like an imposter as a student, as a learner, is to create evidences that you can do it. Let me share with you what it means. That means that, for example, if as a learner, I need to learn something, but I know that there's a test coming. I know there's a project coming on. I know that there's a lot of reading that I need to do so I can understand more. It's hard for me to foresee how the end product will be in 2 weeks or in a month. All I can do, though, is that start to say, okay, if I was to do the project right at the beginning of a unit, I would certainly feel like an imposter because I don't know much about the topic. However, once I start with a unit, I start my learning journey. I start looking at what the trainer or the teachers have to share with me. I read more, I listen to videos, I listen to podcasts. So what happens is that I'm gathering information that makes me feel better about the topic. Second, I also need to build evidence that I know the work. So in class, for example, I can do a discussion. We can have a document where I ask them to summarize what they've learned. If you are doing modern classroom theories, you're asking them to do an exit pass or a mastery check. So these are all things you can ask your students to do as you go along as a checkpoint, so that along the journey, you are gathering evidence as a teacher. But for the learners, they are building evidence of their learning journey. So what happens is that if you're in a class and you ask questions to your students related to what's being learned at this time, the students will feel that they can answer the question, because for the last few days, the last few weeks, they have done activities, they've gathered evidence, either in their binder, in their workbook, for showing that they can do it. And that's what I try to do at my classroom all the time. Because as the students are building evidence that they have done the work, evidence that they've done some learning, then they can certainly answer questions in class. They can certainly answer questions during a test. They can certainly, after they present a project, answer my question. And this is part of a journey of building evidence so that the students feel that they are no longer an imposter, but they are becoming more of a contributor. They can collaborate in the classroom setting, and that's great because it allows everybody to feel that they are a learning community and therefore getting better as we are progressing. Before we continue, I just want to make sure that I have sound for us. We have sound, so that's the main thing, because it would have been interesting if there was no sound. Guess what? I've done a podcast where I forgot the sound and I had to redo it. It's part of learning. My second segment here about this idea that do we feel like imposters? It's for the teachers, in the teacher's perspective, or the trainer's perspective. There you go. So as a teacher, in some ways, you know what you have to do. You have a group of students, you have a group of trainees, you have a group of people that you will overlook. And for them, you will look at a curriculum or topic and you will teach them information so that they can learn by themselves, so that they can move on for their career, they can move on for more studies, or they can better participate in your company or in the school. The best way for a teacher to not feel like the imposter is that they have to have what I call experiential learning. So that means that for a teacher, the best way to become a better teacher is to actually teach. So what does it mean? That means that the first few days, the first few weeks for a teacher, it's very hard. That's why during the training for a teacher, there are some what called practicum. It allows for student teachers to go in a classroom and have a feel of how things are. Because the only way for a teacher to become better is to teach, but also, as I mentioned earlier, is to gather the evidence to know that, okay, I've done this and it works. I will continue to do that. I've done that. I tried, it did not work. So I thought it was a good idea. I can set it aside. So for me, a teaching career, it's all about experiential learning. That means that the more you do it, the better you get. The more you try different strategies, the more you have different ideas, you're learning more pedagogies, and therefore you can do more in your classroom. But at the end of the day, the best way to not feel like you're an imposter as a teacher is to actually go into the field and do it. So over the 25 years, I've had amazing lessons where I have in my mind how it would work. I go through the process and it works beautifully. I've had many days where I've had the most boring lessons. In my mind, it was interesting, but when we were doing it, I was not into it. My students wanted to do it. And often, depending on the class, I remember that there was a group where I asked them that question. Do you feel it's like a boring lesson? Because I really feel bored right now. And they all started to laugh because they said, yes, sir, it was not the best lessons. So the best thing is that as a teacher, you need to take very seriously what you do, but it's important for you not to take yourself too seriously, because by keeping a sense of humor, that helps quite a bit. Now, there's been some lessons I've tried as well, and sometimes either it was the wrong time, or the students were not ready, or the students didn't feel like doing it because there was something happening in the group and they were not ready to learn, something happening in the school, sometimes with families, communities. Sometimes all kind of things could happen where students come in and they're not open for the learning. and therefore it makes it harder for you. And that's how you can become a better teacher, is that realizing that you're not there as a teacher to teach the group, but you're there as a teacher for the group, for them to learn. And there's a bit different into that. For me, when you think of fake teachers, it's the teachers that either they don't know the topics or they are not as inclined for what's best for the students, or in their mind, they know what they want to do and that's all there is. And therefore, it's a bit trickier. I remember if you go years back, I was in teachers college. I was talking with some of my colleagues and teachers, and I was saying that in my mind as a teacher, I thought that when you go into a room as a teacher, people come in quietly, they sit down quietly, they learn everything and absorb what you want to share with them. They're happy, and then they go out. Very little interaction, and you were there for them. Whereas in some ways, the students see you as someone that can help you, but you cannot tell them. They have to learn in that way. So many personalities, so many ways of learning, so many ways of teaching. So my best way for that, as I mentioned, experiential learning as a teacher for teachers, but also building the community in your classroom. Because if you can build your community in your classroom, then you're not a teacher with students, but you are learning community. And as a teacher, you're guiding the students to achieve their best results. So that's, I think, something to consider. With respect to leadership, for leaders, the best way to not feel that you are a fake leader is to realize that a leader comes in a group, either in your community, in your company, as the head of your family, or as a teacher. When you are a leader and you have a new assignment, for example, with a new group, what's interesting, I think, that's my perspective, is that as a leader, your best work is when you are raising the bar, or you're raising leaders as part of your teams. So as leader, so I don't see leadership as a dictatorship. I see more leadership as humans and individuals helping other humans and other individuals to be the best leaders they can be. And I think that's something that is quite nice, because leaders cannot do everything. It's impossible. Sometimes if you think of a CEO of a very large company, they cannot take care of 20,000 people. However, if you are a leader and you are there to help others to become better leaders, so what happens is, as you are part of the organization, you have leaders helping leaders. So overall, everybody feels energized to do what you have to do. And in order to do that, the best way is to do the leadership thing so that you can become a better leader. That's when you will get to know people, get to know how people like to do things, but also succeed in an amazing way, fail in others, but in the same way, learning to become something better. Because I think leadership is something you can learn, but it's a lifelong journey. And that's what is part of this field of idea that students can be leaders in their lives and with people around them. Teachers can be leaders in their lives, in their classroom, in their school community. And leaders can be also leaders in their lives, in their company, and in their community. And all of this is working for the fact that the more you lead, the better you become, the better you are as a human, especially if you are helping other leaders to become better leaders. And these are the topics I wanted to share with you today, keeping in mind that it's okay to feel that you may be an imposter. However, you have to realize that all of us have experiences, and therefore we're not such imposters if we're talking to others and with others about what we know, about our own experiences, about what we've done in the past that has succeeded, sharing with others things that were hard for you or your failure, what you've done that didn't work and how you overcame some of those failures. Then as a human, you are there to help others, and therefore help everybody around you to no longer feel like an imposter and be able to make the world a better place. And that, I think, we can all do this. On this, thank you very much for joining me today. The topic was about overcoming the imposter syndrome. As I mentioned, that's what that hit hard with this book from Robert Kiyosaki. It was called Fake, when he was talking about fake teachers. At that time, I decided that I was not a fake teacher, and that's why I do a lot more outside of the classroom to become better as a human, to get the skills I need so that when I ask my students, there's no doubt in my mind that I can help them. So go out there and be great. If you have a chance to tell me in the comments below what you do that you are best at to help others, I would love to know. So what, as a learner, as a teacher, or as a leader, so that I can learn from you as well. On this, have an excellent week, and I'll see you next Wednesday at 7:30. Take care. Have a great week. Bye-bye.